Hello there. Hello, everyone. Hello, Ali and Pauline and Meggie Pendo. I think that was the name I saw. You might be new, Meggie Pendo. If you are, welcome. This is Fireside Reading. And every day at 5, or the days that I can, I sit in front of the fire and read a chapter or two of a lovely old book to everyone who likes to join and who enjoys this form of entertainment. I have a couple of notes today. The first, very importantly, I received a package, and in the package was Crush. This is a book written by Mary Oldham, who's one of the Firesiders. She may be on now. I hope she is. The love story of Logan and Diana. Mary is prolific. I think this is the 4th book she's written and released recently, although she has a string of them up her sleeve. I read the first one. I did the audiobook for the first one, and it was fantastic. And this is Crush, the love story of Logan and Diana. So I hope if you are interested that you will get it and read it and support Mary. That's wonderful. Also, news. I'm going to a screening tonight of a short film that I was in, along with my daughter Rory. So we're all going to the Marina del Rey Film Festival, which is here west in Los Angeles, to a screening of that short film, which is very exciting. It's called The Butler. You've seen me talk about it on Instagram. It's really very good indeed, and I can't wait to see it on the big screen. It's always very exciting. We get so few chances to see the big screen. Everything is on the small screen, so it'll be fun to watch it on the big screen later tonight. But meantime, very importantly, we continue with The Woman in White and see what is going to happen to Walter Hartwright. We had a letter from Anne Catherick's mother in the last chapter, and it told us all about the dastardly Sir Percival Glyde, and now we're going to find out the ramifications. Welcome to a fireside reading of The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, reading 65. The Story Continued by Walter Hartwright. 1. My first impulse after reading Mrs. Catherick's extraordinary narrative was to destroy it. The hardened, shameless depravity of the whole composition from beginning to end, the atrocious perversity of mind which persistently associated me with a calamity for which I was in no sense answerable, and with a death which I had risked my life in trying to avert, so disgusted me that I was on the point of tearing the letter, when a consideration suggested itself which warned me to wait a little before I destroyed it. This consideration was entirely unconnected with Sir Percival. The information communicated to me, so far as it concerned him, did little more than confirm the conclusions at which I had already arrived. He had committed his offence as I had supposed him to have committed it, and the absence of all reference on Mrs. Catherick's part to the duplicate register at Knowlesbury strengthened my previous conviction that the existence of the book and the risk of detection which it implied must have been necessarily unknown to Sir Percival. My interest in the question of the forgery was now at an end, and my only object in keeping the letter was to make it of some future service in clearing up the last mystery that still remained to baffle me, the parentage of Anne Catherick on the father's side. There were 1 or 2 sentences dropped in her mother's narrative, which it might be useful to refer to again, when matters of more immediate importance allowed me leisure to search for the missing evidence. I did not despair of still finding that evidence, and I had lost none of my anxiety to discover it, for I had lost none of my interest in tracing the father of the poor creature who now lay at rest in Mrs. Fairley's grave. Accordingly, I sealed up the letter and put it away carefully in my pocket-book, to be referred to again when the time came. The next day was my last in Hampshire. When I had appeared again before the magistrate at Knowlesbury, and when I had attended at the adjourned inquest, I should be free to return to London by the afternoon or the evening train. My first errand in the morning was, as usual, to the post office. The letter from Marion was there, but I thought when it was handed to me that it felt unusually light. I anxiously opened the envelope. There was nothing inside but a small strip of paper folded in two. The few blotted, hurriedly written lines which were traced on it contained these words: "Come back as soon as you can. I have been obliged to move. Come to Gower's Walk, Fulham, number 5. I will be on the lookout for you. Don't be alarmed about us. We are both safe and well. But come back. Marion." The news which those lines contained, news which I instantly associated with some attempted treachery on the part of Count Fosco, fairly overwhelmed me. I stood breathless with the paper crumpled up in my hand. What had happened? What subtle wickedness had the Count planned and executed in my absence? A night had passed since Marion's note was written. Hours must elapse still before I could get back to them. Some new disaster might have happened already of which I was ignorant. And here, miles and miles away from them, here I must remain, held, doubly held, at the disposal of the law. I hardly knew to what forgetfulness of my obligations, anxiety and alarm might have not tempted me, but for the quieting influence of my faith in Marion. My absolute reliance on her was the one earthly consideration which helped me to restrain myself and gave me courage to wait. The inquest was the first of the impediments in the way of my freedom of action. I attended it at the appointed time, the legal formalities requiring my presence in the room, but as it turned out, not calling on me to repeat my evidence. This useless delay was a hard trial, although I did my best to quiet my impatience by following the course of the proceedings as closely as I could. The London solicitor of the deceased, a Mr. Merriman, was among the persons present, but he was quite unable to assist the objects of the inquiry. He could only say that he was inexpressibly shocked and astonished, and that he could throw no light whatever on the mysterious circumstances of the case. At intervals during the adjourned investigation, he suggested questions which the coroner put, but which led to no results. After a patient inquiry, which lasted nearly 3 hours, and which exhausted every available source of information, the jury pronounced the customary verdict in cases of sudden death by accident. They added to the formal decision a statement that there had been no evidence to show how the keys had been abstracted, how the fire had been caused, or what the purpose was for which the deceased had entered the vestry. This act closed the proceedings. The legal representative of the dead man was left to provide for the necessities of the interment, and the witnesses were free to retire. Resolved not to lose a minute in getting to Knowlesbury, I paid my bill at the hotel and hired a fly to take me to the town. A gentleman who heard me give the order and who saw that I was going alone informed me that he lived in the neighbourhood of Knowlesbury, and asked if I would have any objection to getting home by sharing the fly with me. I accepted his proposal as a matter of course. Our conversation during the drive was naturally occupied by the one absorbing subject of local interest. My new acquaintance had some knowledge of the late Sir Percival's solicitor, and he and Mr. Merriman had been discussing the state of the deceased gentleman's affairs and the succession to the property. Sir Percival's embarrassments were so well known all over the county that his solicitor could only make a virtue of necessity and plainly acknowledge them. He had died without leaving a will, and he had no personal property to bequeath, even if he had made one, the whole fortune which he had derived from his wife having been swallowed up by their creditors. The heir to the estate, Sir Percival having left no issue, was a son of Sir Felix Glyde's first cousin, an officer in command of an East Indiaman. He would find his unexpected inheritance sadly encumbered, but the property would recover with time, and if the captain was careful, he might be a rich man yet before he died. Absorbed as I was in the one idea of getting to London, this information, which events proved to be perfectly correct, had an interest of its own to attract my attention. I thought it justified me in keeping secret my discovery of Sir Percival's fraud. The heir whose rights he had usurped was the heir who would now have the estate. The income from it for the last 23 years, which would properly have been his, and which the dead man had squandered to the last farthing, was gone beyond recall. If I spoke, my speaking would confer advantage on no one. If I kept the secret, my silence concealed the character of the man who had cheated Laura into marrying him. For her sake, I wished to conceal it. For her sake still, I tell this story under feigned names. I parted with my chance companion at Knowlesbury and went at once to the town hall. As I had anticipated, no one was present to prosecute the case against me. The necessary formalities were observed, and I was discharged. On leaving the court, a letter from Mr. Dawson was put into my hand. It informed me that he was absent on professional duty, and it reiterated the offer I had already received from him of any assistance which I might require at his hands. I wrote back, warmly acknowledging my obligations to his kindness, and apologizing for not expressing my thanks personally in consequence of my immediate recall on pressing business to town. Half an hour later, I was speeding back to London by the express train. 2. It was between 9 and 10 o'clock before I reached Fulham and found my way to Gower's Walk. Both Laura and Marion came to the door to let me in. I think we had hardly known how close the tie was which bound us three together until the evening came which united us again. We met as if we had been parted for months instead of for a few days only. Marion's face was sadly worn and anxious. I saw who had known all the danger and borne all the trouble in my absence the moment I looked at her. Laura's brighter looks and better spirits told me how carefully she had been spared all knowledge of the dreadful death at Welmingham and of the true reason of our change of abode. The stir of the removal seemed to have cheered and interested her. She only spoke of it as a happy thought of Marion's to surprise me on my return with a change from the close, noisy street to the pleasant neighbourhood of trees and fields and the river. She was full of projects for the future, of the drawings she was to finish, of the purchasers I had found in the country who were willing to buy them, and of the shillings and sixpences she had saved, till her purse was so heavy that she proudly asked me to weigh it in my own hand. The change for the better which had been wrought in her during the few days of my absence was a surprise to me for which I was quite unprepared, and for all the unspeakable happiness of seeing it, I was indebted to Marian's courage, and to Marian's love. When Laura had left us, and when we could speak to one another without restraint, I tried to give some expression to the gratitude and the admiration which filled my heart. But the generous creature would not wait to hear me. That sublime self-forgetfulness of women, which yields so much and asks so little, turned all her thoughts from herself to me. "I had only a moment left before post-time," she said, "or I should have written less abruptly. You look worn and weary, Walter. I am afraid my letter must have seriously alarmed you." "Only at first," I replied. "My mind was quieted, Marian, by my trust in you. Was I right in attributing this sudden change of place to some threatened annoyance on the part of Count Fosco?" "Perfectly right," she said. "I saw him yesterday, and worse than that, Walter, I spoke to him." "Spoke to him? Did he know where we lived? Did he come to the house?" "He did. To the house, but not upstairs. Laura never saw him. Laura suspects nothing. I will tell you how it happened. The danger, I believe and hope, is over now. Yesterday I was in the sitting-room at our old lodgings. Laura was drawing at the table, and I was walking about and setting things to rights. I passed the window, and as I passed it looked out into the street. There, on the opposite side of the way, I saw the Count with a man talking to him." "Did he notice you at the window?" "No, at least I thought not. I was too violently startled to be quite sure." "Who was the other man? A stranger?" "Not a stranger, Walter. As soon as I could draw my breath again, I recognized him. He was the owner of the lunatic asylum." "Was the Count pointing out the house to him?" "No, they were talking together as if they had accidentally met in the street. I remained at the window looking at them from behind the curtain. If I had turned round, and if Laura had seen my face at that moment— Thank God she was absorbed over her drawing. They soon parted. The man from the asylum went one way and the Count the other. I began to hope they were in the street by chance, till I saw the Count come back, take out his card case and pencil, write something, and then cross the road to the shop below us. I ran past Laura before she could see me and said I had forgotten something upstairs. As soon as I was out of the room, I went down to the first landing and waited. I was determined to stop him if he tried to come upstairs. He made no such attempt. The girl from the shop came through the door into the passage with his card in her hand, a large gilt card with his name and a coronet above it, and these lines underneath in pencil: "Dear lady." Yes, the villain could address me in that way still. "Dear lady, one word I implore you, on a matter serious to us both." If one can think at all in serious difficulties, one thinks quick. I felt directly that it might be a fatal mistake to leave myself and to leave you in the dark where such a man as the Count was concerned. I felt that the doubt of what he might do in your absence would be 10 times more trying to me if I declined to see him than if I consented. "Ask the gentleman to wait in the shop," I said. "I will be with him in a moment." I ran upstairs for my bonnet, being determined not to let him speak to me indoors. I knew his deep, ringing voice, and I was afraid Laura might hear it even in the shop. In less than a minute I was down again in the passage and had opened the door into the street. He came round to meet me from the shop. There he was, in deep mourning, with his smooth bow and his deadly smile, and some idle boys and women near him staring at his great size, his fine black clothes, and his large cane with the golden knob to it. All the horrible time at Blackwater came back to me the moment I set eyes on him. All the old loathing crept and crawled through me when he took off his hat with a flourish and spoke to me as if we had parted on the friendliest terms hardly a day since. You remember what I said. Oh, no, that's wrong, sorry. You remember what he said? I can't repeat it, Walter. You shall know directly what he said about you, but I can't repeat what he said to me. It was worse than the polite insolence of his letter. My hands tingled to strike him, as if I had been a man. I only kept them quiet by tearing his card to pieces under my shawl. Without saying a word on my side, I walked away from the house, for fear of Laura seeing us, and he followed, protesting softly all the way. In the first by-street I turned and asked him what he wanted with me. He wanted two things. First, if I had no objection, to express his sentiments. I declined to hear them. Secondly, to repeat the warning in his letter. I asked what occasion there was for repeating it. He bowed and smiled and said he would explain. The explanation exactly confirmed the fears I expressed before you left us. I told you, if you remember, that Sir Percival would be too headstrong to take his friend's advice where you were concerned, and that there was no danger to be dreaded from the Count till his own interests were threatened, and he was roused into acting for himself. I recollect, Marian. Well, so it has really turned out. The Count offered his advice, but it was refused. Sir Percival would only take counsel of his own violence, his own obstinacy, and his own hatred of you. The Count let him have his way, first privately ascertaining, in case of his own interests being threatened next, where we lived. You were followed, Walter, on returning here after your first journey to Hampshire, by the lawyer's men for some distance from the railway, and by the Count himself to the door of the house. How he contrived to escape being seen by you he did not tell me, but he found us out on that occasion and in that way. Having made the discovery, he took no advantage of it till the news reached him of Sir Percival's death, and then, as I told you, he acted for himself, because he believed you would next proceed against the dead man's partner in the conspiracy. He at once made his arrangements to meet the owner of the asylum in London and to take him to the place where his runaway patient was hidden, believing that the results, whichever way they ended, would be to involve you in interminable legal disputes and difficulties, and to tie your hands for all purposes of offence, so far as he was concerned. That was his purpose, on his own confession to me. The only consideration which made him hesitate at the last moment. Yes? It is hard to acknowledge it, Walter, and yet I must. I was the only consideration. No words can say how degraded I feel in my own estimation when I think of it, but the one weak point in that man's iron character is the horrible admiration he feels for me. I have tried for my own sake, for my own self-respect, to disbelieve it as long as I could, but his looks, his actions, force on me the shameful conviction of the truth. The eyes of that monster of wickedness moistened while he was speaking to me. They did, Walter. He declared that at the moment of pointing out the house to the doctor, he thought of my misery if I was separated from Laura, of my responsibility if I was called on to answer for effecting her escape, and he risked the worst that you could do to him the second time, for my sake. All he asked was that I would remember the sacrifice and restrain your rashness in my own interests which he might never be able to consult again. I made no such bargain with him. I would have died first. But believe him or not, Whether it is true or false that he sent the doctor away with an excuse, one thing is certain. I saw the man leave him without so much as a glance at our window, or even at our side of the way. I believe it, Marion. The best men are not consistent in good. Why should the worst men be consistent in evil? At the same time, I suspect him of merely attempting to frighten you by threatening what he cannot really do. I doubt his power of annoying us by means of the owner of the asylum, now that Sir Percival is dead, and Mrs. Catherick is free from all control. But let me hear more. What did the Count say of me? To be continued tomorrow. Same time and place, 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram. And I'm sorry to leave you in the lurch, but a good cliffhanger is always fun. Until I see you tomorrow, everyone, please stay very, very well. Goodbye.